So, do any of you remember this video?
My anus is bleeding!
Alright, now what if I told you the same guy who made that made this?
Physics too terrified to recognize the sum of their parts. Inside in the shells of their skulls. All this detail he's never noticed. He's alive. Giant mantis is alive. His body is beginning to grow alive and numb. He's alive.
Both of these were made by the filmmaker, writer, and animator Don Hertzfeldt. Don has been posting animated videos online since, well, basically since the beginning. His videos have had such a large impact on internet culture that his film Rejected won an Oscar and even helped inspire the creation of Adult Swim. And yet, I feel if you were to ask your average person, even someone who's pretty well versed in online culture, they might not even know who Don Hertzfeldt is. So if that's you, let me be the one to introduce you to what I believe to be his best piece of work. This film actually started as 3 different short films, released over 5 years, until eventually it was released as one cohesive film in 2012, to wide critical acclaim. And for good reason. Departing from his more typical dark comedic shorts, It's Such a Beautiful Day, while not losing its sense of humor entirely, takes a more serious existential approach. We follow our main character, Bill, who, as we soon find out, has a brain tumor, and only months to live. And for the course of the movie, we watch Bill as he grapples with this fact and goes through various phases of pain, sorrow, wonder, relief, and acceptance. It is a roller coaster of a film, and will have you taking a breather just to take certain moments in. But let me be clear, this isn't a review. That's not what I'm here to talk about. Should you watch the movie? Hell yeah. But what I really want to explore are the deeper themes that Don Hertzfeldt dives into. Mainly, the meaning of life, and how it, in and of itself, relates to our fear of death. You know, the fun stuff. Throughout the course of the film, Bill is constantly grappling with the fact that he knows his time is limited, and has to deal with everything from mental deterioration to existential dilemmas. And by the end of the film, I think it becomes clearer what Don is trying to say. But I need watch time retention, so you're gonna have to wait to find out what that is. Initially, it begins with Bill developing a sort of fixation for the mundane parts of life, but with strange and, at times, scary moments of existentialism mixed in. For instance, his thought of,
Bill dropped his keys on the counter and stood there staring at them, suddenly thinking about all the times he'd thrown his keys there before, and how many days of his life were wasted repeating the same tasks and rituals in his apartment over and over again. But then he wondered if, realistically, this was his life, and the unusual part was his time spent doing other things.
This raised an interesting question to me. Like, as humans, I think we spend a lot of time just kind of waiting or building up to our highlight moments. And we kind of see the mundane day-to-day as a means to an end to get us to said moments. And while yes, those highlight moments are something to be appreciated and cherished, without a doubt, I think sometimes we can forget the important role that these more mundane things play in our definition of life's meaning. For Bill, this seems to be something he doesn't begin to realize until the prospect of death really begins bearing down on him. And hey, don't take my word for it. In an interview, Don Hertzfeldt himself alludes to this. When asked about the roots of Bill's story, he said, "It began with a World War II story I read about Nazis invading a town. The protagonist is in a large group of people who are being marched through the city and across a bridge where they're going to be shot. This man has lived in this town his entire life, but as he's being marched off to die, he notices details in the cobblestone streets he's never seen before. He sees new things in the faces of the people around him, people he's known for years. The air smells different. The currents in the river look strange and new. Suddenly, he's seeing the world around him for the first time and through these new lenses, and it's disorienting and beautiful. It takes a horrible event sometimes to grab you by the shoulders and shake you, to wake you up." Now, yes, this isn't really a new idea per se. Enjoying the little moments is a common concept seen in a variety of films, but I can't help but be a sucker for it every time. And really, it's Don Hertzfeldt's remarkably unique way of discussing and showcasing this notion that makes it so compelling. From awkward interactions had in passing, to grocery shopping, to watching a man blow leaves, or just taking a walk around your block, Don manages to capture the mundane in such a way that he's able to both make you relate and laugh to it, as well as really get you to sit there and begin pondering your own life. Now, I'd like to briefly focus on that leaf blower scene I just mentioned. When I first watched it, I kind of just laughed at it, and honestly, I tuned out a bit. I wasn't fully engaging with what it was meant to be representing. However, upon rewatch, I came to understand what it was Bill was seeing during this nearly 2-minute sequence. As pretentious as it may sound, I think how the man approached clearing out these leaves is meant to be a parallel to how one may approach their life. We watch the leaf blower man slowly and methodically clear his way through these leaves, with such an intense focus that he doesn't even notice when he begins to blow dust onto Bill. And Bill, being so intensely focused on observing our leaf blower friend, doesn't notice either. I believe what's trying to be conveyed here is that leaf blower guy here is just completely living in the moment for this scene. Intensely focused, slow and methodical with his technique, and giving every leaf his attention. Even spending a good few moments focusing on a troublesome one until finally getting it to break free. All the while, Bill is looking on in what I see as an almost enamored envy at how in the moment this man seems to be. And in being so focused on this man, Bill is in turn doing the same thing, unbeknownst to him. Now, the reason I bring this scene up in particular is because I think it ties into the next major part of the film I want to discuss. About halfway through, Bill is waiting at the bus stop yet again, but this time has a vision. Whether it's prophetic or is brought on by the brain tumor, who knows? As Bill's head floats into space, he begins to picture himself dying of old age, surrounded by his imagined family. And in this imagined moment, he reflects on his long life he's led up to this point, and how so much time was wasted pondering and worrying about death. All this time spent looking back on your life rather than ahead, only to culminate in this stupid, awkward moment of death. And in an attempt to let the people around him know, to warn them of not wasting their time like he has, he tries to reach out, but can only utter,
"It smells like dust and moonlight."
Immediately, this line stuck out to me, and right away, I knew it would be the title of the video essay I make on this movie, if I ended up doing so. Which, I mean, you're here, and listening to me, so I guess I did. Neat. But I'd be lying if I said I had some sort of immediate understanding of what this even meant. Really, it was just more of an innate feeling. Honestly, at the time of writing this sentence, it mostly still is, and me writing the script is just kind of my way of trying to unravel what it actually means. We call that improv here in the biz, okay? There is, of course, the broader theme here of learning to live in the moment and to not burden yourself with worries of the past and future, at least as much as you can. But dust and moonlight, what could that mean? Well, after a couple rewatches and a good few hours of coffee shop pondering, aka my brain constantly hopping between different forms of stimuli whenever I come across a challenging thought, until I'm eventually able to settle myself and actually think and start writing, I think I figured it out, at least my interpretation. I believe the reason Bill utters this phrase in his last moments of this imaginary life is because, well, when we die, that's essentially what we become. Back to what we started as, just dust, floating in the void of space, illuminated by the moonlight. Or starlight, or nothing, depends. The rest of the film is basically built around highlighting this idea in all its aspects. Is it a terrifying thought that in the end we will end up as nothing but a speck of dust in space? Sure. But at the same time, there's beauty to be found in that idea. That our time here is limited before we'll just be floating in moonlight, so we may as well slow down and enjoy all these little moments before that time comes. And it's Bill who fully embodies this concept, particularly after his brief recovery and then subsequent second terminal diagnosis. As Bill's condition worsens and subsequently his memory, he begins to revel in the moment to moment even more, Because after all, what else is left for him now? He basically has no choice. And funnily enough, as chaotic, terrifying, and sad as this part of the film may come off, it simultaneously gives way to the most beautiful parts of it. Bill becomes stuck on action loops, shows up in places without knowing how he got there, and is essentially in a daze towards the end of his life, phasing in and out of consciousness. Yet every moment we get to experience with him is seen as so special. Whether it's watching a man build the courage to call his daughter, admiring the beauty of a walk around his neighborhood, or to Bill having a final moment with his biological father, one that neither of them will remember or even know the context of, but both understand its importance in spite of this. It almost makes you envious with how simply Bill is able to appreciate all of these things for once, with none of the mental or emotional baggage that normally weighs down a tumorless brain going through similar experiences. Understandably, it's rather hard to hone in and appreciate the smaller minutiae of life when life itself is already so damn overwhelming. As a broke-ass 23-year-old myself, I have no problem understanding that. This film, however, was quite a sobering reminder that it's worth at least trying. To try your best to look at life through this film's proposed lens when possible. It won't work every time, and that's okay, but what matters is that you're trying. In the end, Bill's final moments are spent reveling in the fact that
it's such a beautiful day.
But then, our narrator fails to accept the crucial last step in this process, and in his desperate attempt to give Bill the happy ending he wants, imagines a scenario in which Bill goes on to live forever and ever, until time itself ends.
He will spend hundreds of years traveling the world, learning all there is to know. He will learn every language. He will read every book. He will know every land. He will spend thousands of years creating stunning works of art.
And while yes, this is the narrator's desperate, almost ridiculous image of what immortality would look like for Bill, and when pondered on, it probably isn't an existence any of us would ultimately want, there's still something entrancing about it. Obviously the fact that Chopin is playing the whole time kind of cheats your emotions too, but regardless, watching Bill travel the world, create art, discover new life, live through hundreds of love stories, and outlive the stars themselves just touches a part of your soul you never quite noticed until then. The best way I could describe it is a mix of being awestruck and terrified with a soft underlying feeling of yearning. I think that stems from the fact that as amazing as the concept of living forever can always initially come off, deep down, we know that it would make all of our own lived experiences so much less valuable. It's the fact that we know it all has to end one day that gets us to appreciate life. Laughing with a loved one, a sunset on a foggy morning, crying with a loved one, sand between your toes, that feeling when you finally remember what the hell you came into the kitchen for. You know, the things that make life worth living. And it's this cycle of us all having these precious few years before turning back into dust that I think kind of defines our humanity. And I even think Don Hertzfeldt alludes to this himself. Or I read into stuff too much, but hear me out. Earlier in the film, there's a rather darkly comedic sequence of the narrator going over Bill's questionable family history. Questionable meaning we don't know if it's real or not. Lots of crazy people and getting hit by trains. One such family member that gets mentioned, though, is Bill's great-great-uncle, who, as a child, was poisoned and abandoned in the forest, where he went on to grow up into a wild, hairy man who only knew the word Bible. Sure, this small part is mostly played for laughs, but it's the curious nature of his fate that I want to talk about. Bill's great-great-uncle ends up dying alone in a field, under the moonlight, where eventually his body turns into the sprouting point for a sunflower. Aside from seeming to be one of the few family members not killed by a train, I find the specifics of the moon and sunflower to be the most compelling additions here. The moon and sun seem to have reoccurring mentions throughout the whole film. For instance, when Bill's half-brother runs into the water yelling "Boon, Boon," meaning moon, at the sun, or the mention of the sunlight making dust glow on the hospital curtain in Bill's room, and of course, the mention of dust and moonlight. And knowing Don Hertzfeldt, this is no coincidence. The sun and moon in this instance are meant to represent the cycle of life and death. The yin and yang, the ebb and flow, I ran out of analogies. Much like how the moon is only visible to us because of the sun, or that day is only appreciated because of the existence of night, it is because of death that we are pushed to make the most out of our lives with what little time we have. This also in turn gives reason as to why Great Uncle Wildman's body turns into a sunflower after dying under that moonlight. It's a nice visual to indicate that this is just the cycle continuing on. Of course, the immortal Bill ending the narrator gives us is a direct contradiction to the nature of this cycle. Instead of becoming a part of this cycle himself, Bill, in this imagined reality, becomes a passive observer to it, and as a result becomes one who will never get to truly experience it himself, going through lover after lover, losing track of all people you hold relation to, and floating alone in space till the end of everything. So as compelling and happy as it may seem to have Bill go on to live forever, what we're really meant to feel in this moment, I think, is gratefulness. Gratefulness for the fact that this isn't the fate Bill had to live. A fate that would leave him left out of the human experience. It's only when Bill is near death that the narrator is able to imagine how well he would live his eternal life, and not take a second for granted. A peculiar paradox, because in the end, if it weren't for death, Bill would have never truly gotten to know what it was to live. When we're born, the sun rises on our lives, and what a beautiful thing it is. But we're also lucky enough to know that at some point, that sun is going to set. So we may as well do our damnedest to enjoy that time that we have in the sun, as best we can, before the moon rises to take its rightful place in the sky, and we become nothing but dust and moonlight.